first of all, welcome, and thank you for all trying to find your way to this particular location at the Shambhala Center, because there's two other programs that are going on at the same time. So they needed that space, and so here we are. So again, thank you for coming. In case there are people here who are new, this is a kind of an open house talk, and if you didn't know what it's about, I'm here to give kind of a talk on creativity and meditation. So if you permit me to introduce myself, I'm Steve Saitzyk. I'm the International Director of Shambhala Art, which is a arts education program designed to integrate meditation and contemplation into the creative process. I'm also adjunct professor at Art Center College of Design, where I teach all about materials, and I also teach a class called Meditation and the Creative Process. Actually, sometimes we even name it Meditation and the Creative Mind. So it's really an interesting subject, creativity and meditation. So I should first at least try to define what I mean by meditation. I may actually define a couple of things so that we're on the same page, because there's a lot of kinds of meditation. But we're specifically here, at least in this talk, talking about mindfulness and awareness practice. If you want to look it up at Wikipedia or anywhere else, it's also known as shamatha, which is mindfulness practice, also known as calm abiding, development of peace, and awareness, which is also known as vipassana, also known as insight meditation. So that's the kind of meditation we're talking about. We're not talking about visualization practices or what's called absorption meditation. We're talking about learning, in a sense, how to be present in the moment. There's still some pillows if you'd like. So we have a very full house tonight. So there's the other part of this talk, which we need to address, which is creativity, or the creative process. And that's actually worthy of a little bit of discussion. And I'm just curious if anyone here has any way of defining what creativity is, or the creative process is. Anyone want to take that on? We're just playing here. It's okay. There's no grades. Okay, it won't be an exam at the end. But when you, how many people here engage in a creative process of some kind? Raise your hand. Okay, right? So what happens? You decide, you get up in the morning, right? And you say, okay, I'm going to make something. I'm going to be creative, right? Okay? Now, when you say that, what comes next? A vision? What comes before that? And what comes before that? Space. Space?
I didn't say that.
Someone said space. Okay, space. Does that sound familiar at all? So the question is, where does creativity come from? You volunteered to say space, so what comes out of space?
Lots of things, I guess. I mean, everything.
A lot of stuff. Can we say what that stuff is? I don't mean you have to identify any particular item. But
energy or lack of it.
Energy or the lack of it? Okay.
Inspiration.
Inspiration? Just so I can identify, who said inspiration? Okay, so inspiration comes out of space. So what is inspiration?
Seeing new, seeing for the first time, having some sort of...
What are we seeing?
Something that touches us.
Uh-huh. Well, what separates it from all the other stuff that goes on every single day and the rest of the day when we think we're not being creative? What separates that comes out of that moment from all the other thoughts, inspiration, feelings? Satori. Can you say more? Satori, by definition, is what?
Form of enlightenment.
a form of enlightenment. It's actually a particular type of realization or insight or enlightenment. So,
Connectedness.
connectedness to what?
I don't know. That's how I feel.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
The neuropsychologists describe it as what's going on in the brain is the neurons are connecting in new ways, like that
Right.
ways that they haven't connected prior.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you're taking seemingly disconnected things, and
Mhm.
not that anything is necessarily new, but what comes of it is new.
Uh-huh.
Connections are not.
But doesn't that happen all the time?
I don't know. I don't think so. Actually, I don't think it does happen all the time.
Well, why do we treat this decision that we make? I encourage you to envision the notion that you wake up in the morning and you suddenly decide, I want to be creative or do something or make something. What separates that from any other moment in the day? Yes.
It's how I make myself happy.
How you make yourself happy?
I get really happy when I do like that.
Well, what I'm looking for is actually before you get happy. Before the happiness happens.
It's just a feeling, you just do it.
So where does does the feel, okay, we have two things that are going on here that I hear. Let me repeat them back and see if they make any sense. We have our thoughts, and then we have something that doesn't seem to have anything to do with thoughts. Sometimes we refer to it as intuition.
A passion, sort of a passion.
Before you even get to passion.
Because you can't, if you wake up in the morning, I don't think you make a decision to be creative. I think that out of your passion for what it is that you make,
Mhm.
you make it, you work,
Mhm.
or you don't work.
Mhm. Mhm. But what I'm looking for is yes?
That there's an openness that we have to create in order to access that inspiration, so that we can touch that place where everything lies, where all the knowledge is. So if we can open our minds up to that place, then it will naturally bubble up.
That's kind of what I'm looking for.
Awareness, right? You have to be aware.
You also have to be aware, but you also, to some degree, have to be mindful enough to recognize that there is some space for which something can arise and be recognized. And sometimes what I refer to that as a place to land. Often what happens in the creative process is that we decide we want to make something or do something. We make this kind of decision. Now, I'm not saying that really is any different from anything else that goes on in everyday life, but I want to just draw the distinction for the discussion. There's a moment when we are kind of looking for a place to land, because what usually happens for many people, what happens is we get up, we decide we want to do something, and then many of us go and get some coffee. I knew one writer who would circumnavigate their computer. We do what? Usually the first thing that happens for many of us is we procrastinate. And what are we doing in that process? Why don't we just get to work? What are we doing? Why is,
Waiting.
Waiting for what? What
for
are we?
that inspiration to we want to be naturally inspired. We're waiting until something tells us to do what we need to do, what we want to do.
Yeah. So we're trying to actually settle down so that we can actually have an experience, that it can arise and we can recognize it. Because most of the time during the day, even when we are engaged in something that could very much be part of the creative process, we give in to our thoughts and rather than tune into our felt sense. So what I'm trying to draw is this distinction is that we're constantly caught up in the stream of thoughts. We wake up in the morning, we have the thought we want to engage in a creative process. We hover around over and over and over again in our thoughts, waiting to find a place to land. And we try to come to this place to land where there's some space in which something can actually arise and be recognized, our inspiration. And in that moment, there's really two things that seem to be going on. One is what I refer to as a certain sense of felt sense and a thought sense of what's going on. Our intuitive sense is really our felt sense. Now, what I need to do is I need to distinguish between an emotional sense, feeling sense, and a sensory felt sense. What we're talking about here is the felt sense is kind of a gut sense that we have. It's when we rest all of our senses, including our mind, and in this particular tradition, the mind is another sense. In fact, if I might digress for the moment, the mind is where all the other 5 senses come together and are rationalized into one experience. Because the eye doesn't hear, and the ear doesn't taste. So there's some place where it all comes together and it's made sense out of it. And when you rest all your senses, there's a moment before you have a thought about it that you have this intuitive sense. Now, what normally happens for most of us is we're so caught up in our thought sense that we don't recognize that there is a felt sense, unless it just somehow bursts through. Or we get our coffee, we circumnavigate the computer, we do whatever we need to do to settle down, and if you think about it, it's a form of meditation. We're really doing that very much when we do meditation. What we're doing in the process of meditation is actually finding a place to rest our minds. It's a kind of discipline of mindfulness. We're engaging in the process of bringing all of our senses to one place in one moment in time. And of course, what happens? If you meditate, you know that your thoughts arise and they carry you away. And it's hard to come back. Right? So we practice over and over again to come back to that moment. Now, thoughts per se are not bad. It's just there's something interesting that happens with meditation that can benefit the creative process, and that is that we can practice this process of coming back to square one and to the moment, and it naturally orders our experience before our thoughts. The problem for many of us is our thoughts usually precede our felt sense. In other words, our thoughts precede our experience. So what do we experience? We experience our thoughts rather than anything that's actually happening. So our experience is narrow because it's only based on what we can think about, what we permit to come into those senses, what we permit ourselves to experience. So part of what we're really talking about, or I'm suggesting here to explore, is that if you come to rest, if we, instead of meditate on our thoughts, that we come back to our breath, which is part of the process of mindfulness technique, that you're coming back to that moment and you're allowing the natural order to take place, which is experience before thoughts. Therefore, your thoughts are actually based on some experience, some direct experience.
So how do we relate that to drinking our coffee and walking around our computer?
Well, the drinking of the coffee is basically where we have a bit of a thought stream. But it's a kind of a slowed down, ritualized thought stream. So what happens in the process of this slowing down and looking for a place to land, we're actually looking, whether we realize it or not, for the space between our thoughts. One of the things that occurs when you develop a meditative practice, particularly mindfulness, is you begin to realize that your thoughts are really extremely discontinuous. We live under the illusion that it's totally linear, like it's a sentence of some kind. But if you really scrutinize and watch how your mind works, what happens? It's like, here I'm giving a talk, so I'm saying, oh, there's the camera, and yeah, I did turn on the sound system. Oh, we have birds, we feed the birds. Let's see, oh, the car is parked over there. Oh yeah, you asked a question, and so we have that choppiness, but because of our speediness, our not having a place to come back to rest our mind, we get lost in that stream of thought, so we don't really think it has any gaps. And what we're looking for really is the space between. In that space between, in that discontinuity, is where creativity arises. And meditation allows that gap, that little discontinuity to be recognized, and actually makes a little space for something to arise and be seen.
I just actually wanted to, if there's anybody in the back that can't see, I wanted to offer this chair because there's a lot of corner room for me to stand, and I'm a stander.
Anybody
I
who
sense that it's,
would very much like to have a chair? We have one offer of a chair. Everybody seems to be okay.
okay.
So far, so
Very
good. But
good.
thank you. That's very kind of you. So what we're trying to do is, in the process of using meditation and relating it to the creative process, is that it allows you to come back to what is often referred to in this particular tradition as square one. It's a place where all your senses come to rest. And that little, we might say, gap, sometimes it's easy to visualize it as a traffic jam. Our mind is normally a traffic jam, bumper to bumper. And the process of developing a meditative discipline is that you're allowing some space between the cars so you can see what else is going on. Otherwise, if our minds are too crowded, there's a really great book you can, that I strongly recommend, besides, of course, my teacher's book, which is True Perception. But in addition to that, there's a book referred to as Harebrained Tortoise Mind, How Intelligence Increases When You Think Less. Because the reality is that if you study any kind of cognitive science, what you begin to learn is that our conscious mind, the mind that's saying, I'm Steve giving this talk and you are listening and can we get enough people in the room and all of that stuff going on, is actually a very small percentage of what's actually going on. It's only the part of your brain that can put that together. Someone did a study I read recently, I think it was also published in a newspaper article, that there's something like 11 million bits of information that we take in every second, only 200 of which we're actually conscious of. So what our intuition is really coming back to those senses, those 6 senses, and allowing them to manifest, unfiltered, and having that experience. And that information actually informs us a lot more than our logical thoughts inform us. However, thoughts are not bad, because without thoughts, that experience, that intuitive process, that intuitive thing that comes up, those senses, that experience that happens, would have no means of being captured and put to work. So sometimes there's this misunderstanding, because sometimes people think, well, because we have 2 things, one must be more important than the other. And if it comes first, that must be proof of the fact. So by even saying that it's a good thing to allow our intuitive process, our mindfulness, our felt sense to arise first, and then whatever thoughts we have at least come out of that, that somehow the felt sense is superior to the thought sense. But that's not true. It's 2 wings of a bird, as they say. You can't fly without it. There would be no way, in a sense, to appreciate fully artwork in terms of the viewing process if we didn't also have a thought sense, because that provides the container. That actually enriches the square one. That enriches our creative process by letting us to go back and have more to work with, because it provides that container. Otherwise, it's like incense. It just, the smoke fills the room and it dissipates. There's no container for it. So meditation benefits the creative process also in other ways. What it does is, mindfulness meditation develops clarity, so that we can see actually how our mind works, that we can see how our thoughts are, and how they appear to be continuous when they're not. We can also see how our thoughts can shape our experience, and how we can actually let go of our thoughts and have an experience. That's the mindfulness aspect. The awareness aspect is one in which insight occurs, where we actually can kind of start connecting the dots. That things do percolate. If you read the lives of people who have come up with formula and mathematical things and inventions and art forms, there's none that I have ever read that ever said that the person thought it out and logically deduced it. It's usually when they gave up and threw down the chalk, walked out of the room, had a good night's sleep, went to talk to somebody, even had an argument with somebody. It didn't occur as some logical train, and that is because sometimes things do need to percolate. You need to let go of it you need to create some space for it to arise. One of the difficulties that sometimes people have when they're very creative people and engage in meditation is they start doing their meditation, and 10 minutes into it, they actually do have a wonderful inspiration, and they want to stop meditating to write it down. Oh my God, I got to write that. It's really, this is good stuff. And you know what? It is good stuff. But the recommendation is you let it go, no matter how good it is. Because it's a little like trying to farm, and you plant the seeds, and the first green sprouts come out, and you rip it out of the ground, and you show it, hey, look what I got. Okay? Never really flowers. So part of the meditation practice involving in a discipline and a creative process is when you decide to meditate, you meditate. And no matter how good it is, no matter how bad it is, you let it go like all thoughts. Now, I shouldn't tell you this, but the odds are is when you're finished meditating, if it's really good, it usually comes back anyway. But we don't want you like spiders in wait. We don't want you engaging in a meditative process thinking, I know it's going to happen because Steve said it's going to happen. And then what happens is what? You spend all your time trying to, well, let's see, are we done yet? 3 more minutes, almost done yet? I know I can write it down when I'm done. Because we will find anything to do rather than sit and do nothing. But if you don't plow those fields, if you don't develop some patience, nothing arises. And if it does arise, we tend to kill it. So part of this is learning that meditation develops that patience. It creates the ground, it tills the soil, allows things to come to fruition, and you can afford to let them go. You can be generous enough with yourself that you can let it go no matter what comes up and what arises. So something does arise. What do we do when something arises? We'll say, finished meditating, whatever it is, and you've actually had another cup of coffee or tea, or you've gone for a walk and something pops up. What do we do? Some of you, each of you have a different creative process. If you're a writer, you might write it down, right? Anyone wanted to share their experience? What happens when you write it down? You write it down, or you take a brush and sketch it. So you have your first brush strokes, you have your first words. What do we do then? Where do we come? What do we do? What's the next step?
Try to get out of its way.
Try to get out of its way. Okay. It manifests, it comes out, you stop for a moment, and you're stuck. What do we call it? We call that writer's block, artist block, this block, that block. So what do we do? Like I also write as well as paint. So one of the things that I learned in writing, because I have writers sometimes ask, what do you know, I got writer's block, what am I going to do? I don't know what's coming next. 9 out of 10 times, there's 2 things you can do. You can forget about it. You can go to sleep. In fact, actually one of the things that sometimes is helpful is that you think about where you are in your project, whatever your project is. You don't try to solve it. Okay? You just think about it before you go to sleep, and you totally let it go and you go to sleep. Most of the time you wake up in the next morning, you're at the beginning of something because you've given it some space. But while you're working, if it isn't 11 o'clock at night or whatever, you can still come back to that state of mind, that meditative state of mind. You could meditate. You could come back. What happens is when you develop a meditation practice, after a while, that square one becomes familiar. It starts carrying over a little bit. Maybe it's only a minute after you get off the pillow, and then you're back into the stream of stuff. Okay. And maybe next time it's 5 or 10 minutes. Maybe it's an hour or 2. It's called a post-meditation experience. So you meditate and it carries forward. And then after a while, if you continue to work and develop a meditative discipline, your process actually becomes what's called meditation in action. Now, my son and other artists I run into often say, in fact, I sometimes use this in my blurb for my class at Art Center College, is that a lot of artists will say is, my creative process is a meditation. And my usual response to that is, Maybe it is. But you can only know if you develop an actual meditation practice first. Because you don't know what it is to meditate until you do it. You can't intellectualize about meditation. Like one of the classes I give, I say, it's called meditation in the creative mind. If you're not going to meditate, there's no point in taking this class because you can't get it. You can't understand what meditation is, which is basically trying to work with direct experience unless you have the direct experience. It's not a thought experience, it's a direct experience. So it's a process of actually engaging in the process of actually doing it. And it's only at that point that you can then say, oh, you know what? I have meditated. I have come back to square one. I can see how it does connect to my creative process. And then you can make that statement. But until you do, you don't know. Because there's a very subtle thing that goes on outside of meditation when you engage in any kind of creative process, even if you are fully there, is that there's still some movement. And that movement tends to move your mind. It tends to move your thoughts. And you can't know truly what that means until you have a moment where there's some space between your thoughts. And we're also not talking about thoughtlessness and mindlessness. I have some people I work with in the creative process and meditation, and sometimes, when I ask them to repeat back what is meditation about, well, what they say, well, I'm trying to become thoughtless. I'm trying to get rid of my thoughts, trying to get to some happy state. Well, that's not what shamatha is about. That is not what vipassana is about. The thoughts are still there. It's just you're not going along for the ride. It's kind of like the taxi comes up to the house, and you say, well, yeah, okay, I'm supposed to be following my breath, so I'm not going to get in this cab. Goodbye. Another one comes up. Next time, it's kind of like a limo. That's a really good one. Maybe I should get in that. No. I'm supposed to, boycott it, but it's there. So the vehicles keep coming. The invitations keep coming. Sometimes they get very, very seductive. But you don't have to go along for the ride. And it's the process of not going along for the ride, of coming back to the moment, that allows the benefit of meditation to actually benefit the creative process. So rather than me prattling on, maybe we can have a little discussion. Has this raised any questions for you? Does this sound familiar? Do you think it's just...
My question is to you. In your class, do you sit on the spot then for 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, and then start painting or writing? Is that what you suggest? I mean, I'm just kind of wondering.
Well, it depends a little bit on the person's practice experience. The goal is, at some point, after you've practiced a lot, that coming back to square one is an activity that you can do on the spot. So the notion is that your meditation, your creative process actually is a form of meditation. You're constantly kind of in square one. Now, I've been asked also this, maybe digressing a little bit from what you're saying, but I've been also asked is, well, I'm in the flow. But you see, there's another type of meditation called absorption meditation, where you're involved actually not being fully in the now. You're actually in your head somewhere, in some fantasy land or visual, not that we don't have visualization practices here, but it's kind of where you're self-absorbed, that if somebody tapped you, you wouldn't feel anything. If you laid on a bed of nails, you wouldn't feel anything. This is not it, because there's a type of flow in the creative process for which you lose your awareness. You can be mindful, but unaware. Okay? That's why I said in the beginning, we're talking about mindfulness and awareness. By the way, you don't directly go after awareness. You develop awareness by doing mindfulness and recognizing it when it occurs. Okay? So it's important to understand that we're not talking about absorption creative process. We're talking about being mindful, being present, and also aware, maintaining your general awareness. We're also not talking about a lot of self-dialoguing, like I was kind of pretending before, like And of course, I actually do have some self-dialogue while I'm giving this talk. You know, I'm doing this, you're doing that, this is going on, what do I think of this? Would my father have liked this? Would my brother have liked this? Would my dog like this? My kitty, my birds, whatever. I don't really have all these animals, by the way. So we're basically saying that just you can be in the background. You know, just because, you know, the other analogy is that it's like being born into a day when there's nothing but clouds in the sky. So maybe people get born in Seattle and a couple of years later the clouds disappear. I'm joking, of course, but the clouds part, and it's like a big surprise. It's like the sky is cracked, you know, and the blue sky comes through, and we, you know, after a while we begin to really realize, oh, there's a sun, there's something beyond the clouds, and the clouds are just, they're just clouds. They're beautiful. They're some good, some threatening, but they don't obscure any longer that you know that there is sun. There is this an insight. There's this kind of mindfulness and awareness behind it. Someone back there has been trying to raise a hand. Yes?
Can you define awareness? Because I'm assuming if I'm involved in a piece and I have like a heightened awareness between me and the piece that I'm working on, and you're saying that's actually absorption?
I'm not saying it is, because I can't, of course, know what's going on actually in the moment with you. It can happen that it is primarily mindfulness without awareness. And generally the way you can tell, sometimes you can't tell until after, but you haven't lost the sense of back. Okay. You know, when we're in the flow, it's almost all in front of us. Does that make any sense what I'm saying? Now, if you don't have that, then maybe it's not an issue for you. But for a lot of people, it's very much in front, right in front of them. And they're in the flow, but they've lost the surroundings, they've lost what's behind them, they don't hear the birds anymore, they don't you know, taste what's in their mouth from breakfast if they had it, they don't feel their clothes. They are totally in that world, but it's kind of narrowed down. It's like sometimes people describe meditation as focus and concentration. It's not concentration.
So I'm getting the impression from the way you're saying that would be a negative.
Well, it's not the whole picture is what I'm saying. I don't want to say it's a negative, because we go through a certain process of mindfulness that leads to awareness. And again, this may not apply to the description, apply to what you're specifically describing. But we go through a process of actually, to take it even a step back. In the beginning, we pretend to meditate. We get our meditation instruction, and we're actually just pretending to meditate. And that's because that's how we learn. We're pretending to do it, and then we actually discover at a certain point, we actually are becoming mindful. We realize we are coming back to square one occasionally. We usually recognize it after we're kind of out of square one. And then after a while, it begins to expand to a point where I don't want to give everything away, because it's important that, you know, people here are maybe beginners and different points in their meditation practice, but at a certain point, it expands out to a general kind of awareness, and mindfulness and awareness come together. In the beginning, that sense of what I've just described is a very important sense of, it's called close attention. It's actually a form of mindfulness meditation that you develop. So I can't say, and I wouldn't say, that it's somehow negative, because you have to develop that on the way. And in fact, still today, you know, obviously I've done a fair amount of practice. Even today I will use close attention. Sometimes after it's a very, very difficult, challenging day or whatever, I'll use that close attention. And then after I've spent a period of time with that, then I will relax that into a more relaxed form of mindfulness and generalized awareness. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah.
Okay. It's an important point. So thank you for bringing it up. Yes.
In your experience, is absorption less effective for your creative process than the mindful awareness?
Well, we all need a break from time to time. I actually read something very interesting by my late teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and that is at a film institute. People were kind of asking him about filmmaking, you know, I don't know the whole context of it, but my sense of the question came from, you're going to see kind of an irritating, boring movie or whatever it is. I mean, why go and do that if you're a meditator and whatever? And basically, he was trying to say is it still creates some space. So it still creates some space. So absorption meditation does create some space. Mm-hmm. The problem is, from my point of view, mindfulness awareness practice, is it kind of reinforces the kind of meditation that doesn't benefit us so much. It does create the space, but that's all it does. It's kind of like having a really nice drink at the end of the day.
Okay.
So it's helpful in that sense. But you see, we engage in absorption meditation quite often without really thinking about it. Every time we watch TV program and we laugh at the jokes or get involved or weep with the sadness of the story, we're meditating on the TV. Or if we have an exam that's coming up, we meditate on our stress about that. If we can't pay the bills or the dog is sick, we meditate on that. Okay. So we actually, all we're doing when we engage in specifically mindfulness training is that we're switching the object of meditation to something that actually benefits us. Okay? So the other one keeps things status quo. We're talking about something where the depth and profundity and insight that can take place is limitless because you've opened it up. There's no borders anymore unless you place them there.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions. One is this meditation possible to do while you're doing something else? My discipline requires a tremendous amount of practice on an instrument.
Yeah.
Every day.
Yes.
And I've tried to develop a meditation to go with it. I have not been successful.
Well, I'm not a musician, but I have a sense. I actually, we have Shambhala art teachers. A number of them I've trained and have been trained in this process for this educational program. And one of them actually teaches musical composition, has won some awards. He's a teacher at 3 different colleges back east. And we've had little talks, not more I would love to have. But the thing that I understand that you're doing in practicing is you are actually engaged in a form of shamatha. It's the constant discipline of returning to what it is your task is over and over again. One of the advantages, particularly with music, is it's not engaged in the thought process. It's a very ephemeral. It's very much like the breath. I would still encourage you to have a formal meditation practice, not while you're doing your instrument, but as part of your life to help enrich the way that you play.
I have a formal practice. It's just too much time.
Time, yeah. Yeah.
And I'm trying to combine the two ideas
Yeah.
to save time.
Yeah.
And my particular meditation is not working for that. I wondered
Yeah.
if yours might.
Well, as they say, I feel your pain. The problem with meditation is that it's just very time consuming. I can...
That wasn't a complaint.
No. And it was more, just you reminding me of how much, how do I fit it into my life. It is very, very hard. But part of the thing that I feel about engaging in the creative process and why I've devoted so much time to this thing called Shambhala art is because there's a kind of warriorship, and the notion of warriorship is that you create this base through your meditation practice, but that the idea is that you can translate that into your musical practice, just that I could translate that into my painting practice or my writing practice, that it does come together, that they reinforce one another. The thing is in the, I don't know what stage you're in, but in the beginning it's very important to engage in a considerable amount of actual physical practice in the beginning. So that you truly settle in. And at that point, once you've settled in and make that connection to your creative process, I don't want to say it doesn't require as much, but they do seem to reinforce one another. There's no, the space between your meditation physical practice and the time you begin, is to stop one and begin the other, there's not so much drifting away going on anymore, because it kind of filters into just washing the dishes and driving the car. There's an old thing that my teacher said a long time ago, is that at a certain place in your practice, you begin to develop this nostalgia for when you wish you could go back to sleep. And you just can't. You try. Now you can, actually, if you stop practicing, if you pretend it doesn't happen, but you actually, in my experience from people I've seen do that, they often become even more confused than they were when they started out. So I guess in a sense I'm saying it's a little like a snake in a bamboo too. Once you begin this, it's very hard to back out. You just have to keep going ahead, because it's like you've woken up and you kind of realize a certain reality is true, whatever that means, and you can't pretend any longer.
You can't meditate while you're driving the car either.
Yes, you can, but it wouldn't be you following your breath. The object of meditation would be something else. Now again, you can, any practice can be part of meditation, but again, it's very important to have that initial stability in your meditation practice to start with, before they can translate into that. Otherwise, what happens is we fool ourselves. We think we're meditating when we're not. We're actually being mindful of our thoughts, really, than anything else. So hopefully that helps. Someone over there, okay.
I can totally relate and experience playing music before I started to meditate, was very absorbed, and quite often led into the experience of almost being high while I'm playing. So it felt great, but I don't know that it was always real. It was great to me, but versus now when I play, there's a lot more clarity. I'm still in the moment, but I'm not absorbed in the same way, but yet I have more clarity as to what I'm doing, so I actually have more freedom. I'm much more open to what I'm doing, and I'm not so taken away with what I think is happening, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, my mind is recalling similar experiences for myself. Yeah, without music, of course, I can barely hum a tune. Yes.
I'm sorry. How do I know I'm in mindfulness?
Okay, that's a good question. Did you want to return after you get your shot?